Hey, everybody, this is David Pohl, the host of the Capital Stack podcast, where we talk to investors, entrepreneurs, and operators about all things value creation within startups. I am your host, David Pohl, which I've already said, but now I'm going to talk about Caitlin Wege, who is the managing director of MooDoos Investments, which is a family office based out of San Diego. They invest in early stage companies opportunistically, from software, manufacturing, horse drugs, like lots of different cool stuff that I want to dig deep into. Caitlin, how you doing?
Great. It's been a whirlwind of a May. I don't know if other people are in my shoes, but work travel has been not a thing for the past 2 years, and now suddenly I've had my fair share of work travel crammed into 1 month now that borders are opening up and everything. So it's been exciting but busy.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about carrying a bag again. There is no substitute for face-to-face interactions.
100%. I was actually just out visiting one of our portfolio companies in Toronto, and I stay in touch with them because I'm actually the chair of the board, and very, very regular cadence, and feeling like Zoom is great, but then you actually get in front of them and you're like, wow, Zoom just doesn't cut it.
Mm-mm.
It's not the be all end all long term solution. So
No, and I think Zoom knows that.
oh yeah, I mean, but we now know that the convenience is there and you can get a lot done. I mean, there were,
Exactly.
multi-million-dollar transactions happening over Zoom. I think, NuFund, a group of angels that I'm president here in San Diego. I remember going into the pandemic and a lot of folks were like, I will never invest in a company unless I can meet the founder in person, I can meet the team, and I can see their office. That changed really quickly. And actually, it wasn't just us. I mean, there's a lot of like professional VCs that felt the same way. And it's amazing how quickly that changed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yep. So why don't you give us the background story, Caitlin? Tell us about yourself, MooDoos Investments, the origin story, the name, all of it.
yeah. Well, we can start with the name because that's always a good like party conversation. Conversation starter. Everyone's always like do something to do with agriculture because it's like moo, cow. And I'm like, well, if you take a look at our portfolio, you'll see that it's definitely not agriculture. There is actually one ag tech company in there that's quite remarkable that we can talk about later. But Moodoo stands for mom and dad. So we're a family fund. We're managed by my sisters and my father. And one of my sisters and my mom are also partners, but they're silent partners. They don't actually operate the fund the way the rest of us do. But Moo stands for mom, and Do stands for dad. So those are the two names that my sisters and I called my mom and dad growing up. It's kind of like a term of endearment. We still call them that. So
Awesome. And then
therefore, it's
how
Moodoos.
did you is your dad an investor, and how did he come about
Yes.
to start up this fund?
Yes. I mean, he's been investing for about 30 years. That's when he started the fund. Previous to that, his original background is PhD in organic chemistry. So he worked for Eli Lilly for a number of years in the 70s, working on drug development and then eventually chemical manufacturing. And then he jumped into our original family business, which is office furniture manufacturing, which brought us to Toronto, which is where I grew up. And then heading into the late 80s, 90s, he really decided that he enjoyed the part of his job. So he was president of that furniture company, the subsidiary that was in Canada. And he decided his favorite part of the job was really kind of the new products and like the mergers and acquisitions. And so, he left that job so that he could start investing in and consulting with startup companies. But of course, in the late 80s and 90s, there really wasn't the same kind of startup ecosystem that you have now in large cities. So, you couldn't go to the local incubator and plug yourself in and find a really cool team to support. You had to go to the local academic institutions. So for us, it was like U of T, Ryerson University, Queens, Western Ontario. Those are the big universities in Southern Ontario, and he would, look for business partners and or excited recent MBAs that were getting into this thing called entrepreneurialism, which really wasn't a thing back then. And he was really looking to build long-term legacy companies, kind of come in as a silent partner and build the management team and kind of seed them and help them grow. And that thesis has kind of changed over time now that my sisters and I have gotten involved the past probably 15, 20 years. And so has that landscape. As you know, seed investing, angel investing, VC, that whole landscape has changed in terms of how investments are made and what kind of returns they're looking for and that sort of thing. So,
Nice. Have you ever locked horns with your dad on a deal?
of course. It wouldn't be a
Good.
family, we couldn't call ourselves a family fund if there wasn't, and I wouldn't say locked horns. I think he is always open to be, he has his own thoughts on things, and so does my sister. I mean, we make group decisions. We scout individually, but we make group decisions, and everybody is open to hearing your proposal and meaning mine or my sister's or my dad's, and the reasoning behind why we would want to make the investment. So there's never like a absolute no. It's always, let's think about this together. You present it to us, and then we'll think about how this fits into our portfolio, what the return profile is, and maybe we can come to an agreement. It's more like that.
Okay,
So
right. So you
yeah.
can have intellectual conversations about it
Yes.
without and everyone has to listen, right?
Yes.
That's the rule.
Yeah, the
Um,
rule is everybody listens, gives each other, space to kind of, um, like I said, propose the deal, and we try to get into each other's shoes and on why it's important. And I think another key, though, working with family is difficult. And I know now we live in kind of a virtual work world. We've always been virtual, so that's been
mhm,
helpful.
mhm.
So I'm here in San Diego, but the family office is virtual. My dad's in Arizona, splits his time between Arizona and Toronto. My sister's in
Oh, cool.
Boston. I have another sister who splits her time between Cleveland and Phoenix. And so when you have that nice space working together as a family, I would say it's much easier. So
That's fantastic. So who's got the best IRR? I ask the hard questions, Caitlin.
I mean, I would say, my sister Jessica has been an active partner longer than I have, so she has a few more exits under her belt than I
Nice.
do.
That's a timing thing. That's not
It is
reflective
a
of yeah.
timing thing, absolutely. And we're not competitive at all, actually, believe it or not. We will jump in and
Really?
help each
Oh
other on
wow.
deals all the time. Yeah.
That
I
sounds
sit
like a
on
very healthy relationship.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
We get along really well, and it's all about kind of like, we're working to I think the good thing about it being a family and not having the same pressure of having outside investors, we're all about just kind of working together, and we have, we're patient capital as well. So we're willing to put in the time with each of our portfolio companies and really dig in and give them what they need. And if that means I have to support my sister on a deal and she needs to support me, even at the board level, we do that. So,
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I was involved in a multifamily office doing software type companies and investing through them, and it was difficult because I think family office money, at least in my experience, has always been a little bit more emotional because there's not a capital mandate going out, and there's really an investment committee of one, right? And that's the guy
mhm.
who is the person, in this case, my case was a patriarch, right? And then it was kind of
Mhm.
just we would all have a talk, but that was just for formality.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about us is that there is a patriarch, right? My dad, but there I have 4 older sisters, so 3 of them are, active in the fund like I am, and so we outnumber him. And my mom being the woman that she is, she did not raise wallflowers. She raised very opinionated, very powerful
Hmm.
women. And so yeah, so the patriarch has his ideas, but also he's open to listening to all of us, and you know, so
So that's my dream. I have 3 young girls, and I would love if they would want to work in the family office, because they
yeah.
would be, in my opinion, vipers, right? I mean, just nonstop ninja killers. And
Mhm.
um, I honestly think that if there were more women in PE and VC, we would probably all be out of jobs. Because,
I
you
love
know,
that.
no, I really do, because I mean, like I feel like, so much, and me included, is just so driven by ego, and the soft skills are really hard to get at scale, right?
Mhm.
For at least in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also
Okay,
that collaborative part, right? Like, I'm not saying
right.
men as leaders are not collaborative. I just feel like women are so used to being collaborative, and that's kind of a superpower too.
And women, I feel, listen, right? I mean, as
Mhm.
opposed to men are wait for their turn to talk,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they call that listening.
Yep.
At least in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. Sometimes
Um,
don't wait. Just kidding.
Yeah, sometimes sometimes they don't wait. So you all have your own sourcing abilities. Tell me a little bit about kind of how you think about strategizing and the overall investment thesis that's evolved over time, and kind of IRR profiles, what types of companies you want to broke into. But you seem very broad, so we'd love to kind of know the parameters that you guys set.
Well, the parameters are funny because there really aren't that many,
Hmm.
because it has evolved over time. So, like I said, my dad originally was investing, with an expectation of legacy companies, and we do have one of those legacy companies, still operating today, and that's, the pharmaceutical manufacturing company up in Toronto, which I chair of the board. And then, like I said, when my sisters and I started getting involved about 15 years ago, landscape was changing. Like the angel investor, was kind of like the heyday of the angel investor, and a lot of, new VCs were coming on, and a lot more, capital in the system, and more talented teams to invest in. So there was a little bit of a shift in how we make investments, and we kind of dabbled in making a lot of little investments. So kind of following that portfolio, the math of the portfolio of like needing to invest in at least 12 to 25 companies, because, a certain ratio is going to not succeed, and you need to return at least, your investment,
Hmm.
by
Hmm.
creating this diversity. And we saw some success there, but actually, given that my dad's real comfort zone is building companies, we kind of reverted back to that, thesis. And some of our more, recent successes have been when we come in really early, sometimes first check in, and then lead the round and participate in a way that's more than monetary. So, like, maybe it's a board position, or it's, an advisory role if it makes sense, and then continue to follow on, um, as long as we can until exit. And a lot of times, the company profile is one that is going to be sustainable and probably break even, earlier than maybe your typical profile, and one where the entrepreneur or founder is really focused on, utilizing and conserving cash rather than just fundraising. And the
Hmm.
reason why that's exciting is that sometimes we can exit after only a few rounds, right? And so that may not be what a VC would be looking for, because a lot of the times they're looking for, something that's going to be 100x in a unicorn, and that's kind of the economics of the fund. That's the only really way that they can manage the economics. And for us, it's like if we can be 20, 30x all day long, um, and maintain our position in the company, that's great for us.
Yeah, I wouldn't shy away from the 20 X's. Those are pretty good. Those are pretty good
Yeah,
outcomes.
but just meaning, like, I think a lot, because we are a family-owned fund, the economics are different, and, because of the history and the comfort we have in coming in early, it makes sense to look for those kinds of deals. whereas a typical VC would not be looking for those type of deals. So,
Yeah. And there's all the ones in between, right?
right.
I just feel like in the last 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of people that fall under the term venture capitalist. Some of them are the like, I want the power law return, where
Mhm.
it needs to have a ginormous market and a ginormous,
Mhm.
upside potential. And then
Right.
there's the private equity guys that want to dabble in venture capital, and they've got more of a lower miss rate, marginally profitable type profile. And then
Mhm.
there's everybody in between that really doesn't, really know what they're supposed to be doing, right? Because
Mhm.
they haven't really done it a lot. And so they're just kind of funding companies, right?
Right.
And then so it sounds like from your perspective, your capital is very patient. You don't have the need to mark up your investment, right? Which
Mhm.
requires usually tons of capital and yet another VC shoving in a ton of capital.
Yeah.
So that TVPI, like, multiple uninvested capital is not really an issue for you,
Mhm.
because it doesn't matter. You're worried about the basic fundamentals of the business, and you're so deeply entrenched in the business that you can offer meaningful feedback.
Yep. Exactly. And support them along the way. So,
Yeah. So what are some of the companies that you personally work with that you're excited about
yeah.
that, you're right now? Pump your book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've talked about on a previous podcast of a local company called Neuralace. I sit on the board for, and that is a medical device company that is focusing on treating neuropathic pain non-invasively and without pharmaceuticals or opioids, which is huge, right? So one of the things that drives me is making impact, but we're not necessarily an impact fund. But if we're going to invest in a company, we want the company to have some sort of make a big difference in the world and not just a return profile. And so that's a local company here in San Diego. Like I said, I sit on the board. Really, really, really exciting what they're doing. They raised a Series A last year. They got FDA clearance. Now they're now working on reimbursement. Their go to market is kind of working with the VA hospital, which is a patient population that really needs this solution. Really taking care of our men and women in service, and a lot of them, do deal with PTSD and neuropathic pain, and that patient population was very affected by the opioid crisis. So it's really nice to be involved in such a wonderful product that's going to make a big difference for a lot of people, and then also to be working with a very passionate founder, a local founder here in San Diego as well. So that's kind of what I've been focusing a lot of my time on. The other really, I mean, it's hard to I hate picking favorites, right? It's hard because we are so involved with each and every one of our companies, and they're all wonderful companies. We have been focusing more on women founders and underrepresented founders as of late. My sister Jessica, if you go back to kind of impact, my sister Jessica is now chief operating officer. So she's actually hopped into operating one of our portfolio companies. And what's really exciting about this company, talking about impact, it's called Connect Bio. And what they do is they are creating a additive, a very healthy additive to fish feed. And this is the feed that goes into large fisheries, and what they do is they take a readily available microbe, and through a fermentation process, they can turn it into a protein that actually improves the microbiome and health of fish in fish farms. And the reason why that's really important is because right now, the inputs that we have when we grow fish in farms are usually monocrops like soy and corn. They're not good for the environment to be growing them and supplying them. And they're also usually loaded with, um, you know, uh, what's the word I'm looking for?
Bad,
um,
bad stuff.
Bad stuff. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Friday afternoon. A lot of bad stuff, and that's going into the food that we're eating, and so we're consuming it that way. And then also the fish are not staying healthy. And even with the nutritious feed that they have that is available, um, in the process of growing um, fish for food, they get to a certain, so they start out as like baby fish, juvenile, and then when they get to a certain size, they have to move to a larger, if this is a farm, right, and it's contained in a tank, they then need to be moved into a larger tank so they can continue to grow until they're the size of which we can consume. And that transfer from juvenile moving into the adult tanks is very stressful. And this additive that we have, this sustainable protein that we have, works with the microbiome of the fish and keeps them very healthy. And so that transfer from juvenile to adult, the farms usually have a really high mortality rate, which costs them a lot of money. And then it's also very wasteful, and it's less food to feed the world. And so this is able to keep the fish healthy. And so during that transition, that stress, that lowers the mortality rate by a considerable amount. So it helps the bottom line of the farmers, and it also helps us sustainably feed the planet with sustainable protein, like fish.
Yeah,
So
just when you think the world's out of ideas, right? The fish food guy comes and completely like
Mhm.
transforms how fish farming's done. How'd you source
Yeah,
that one?
that's from my sister. Her background is biochemistry. She lives in
Hmm.
Boston. She connected with another scientist that understood the technology. The technology came out of Harvard. That was a really good example of coming in really early, because I feel like the founder pitched this to her on the story goes, the back of a napkin at a Starbucks.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
her, given her background, was like, this is really, really interesting. And there's a lot we can do. And there's so much more that they call it the bug, this bug
Hmm.
that they ferment. I am not a biologist, as you can tell. It's a platform now. There's so many things that they can do with this bug that is going to improve the fishing and fishery industry. But you got to start with one market first.
That's amazing. That's so
Yeah,
cool. What a cool
very, very
business. And
cool.
like when you work for just a standard VC fund where your mandate's B2B SaaS, I mean, like things can start looking
Exactly.
really repetitive.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I mean that's super cool. So um when you're looking and you're like first check in and you're super early and you're looking at business plans on the back of napkins at Starbucks, what are the heuristics that you look for and people picking? Because you're not company picking at that point.
No, yeah, I mean, the product has to be interesting, but as most, seed investors understand, that you can invest in an A product and a B team, and it just won't survive,
Hmm.
right? But investing in an A team with a B product, that A team can turn it into an A product very easily. I mean, obviously, you need to vet the product and make sure that the market's big enough and that the technology is unique enough and it's scalable and all of those wonderful things. But again, it's an early stage company, so there's nothing that guarantees that that product is going to succeed the way that you think it's going to. But the person behind the wheel has a huge impact, and influence on how that product survives and makes it to market. And so the things that we look for is really founder market fit. So we've all heard of product market fit. We talk about founder market fit, and you can tell that by spending time with a founder. Do they have the passion? Do they understand the purpose behind what they're doing? Who are they? Why do they feel like they're the right person to bring this product to market? I ask, I like to learn all about, like, their childhood, like their, how they came to be. I mean, sometimes you're talking to a founder and it's not cut and dry, like, oh, I always knew I was an entrepreneur from the age of 6 when I had my paper route, and then I went and got my MBA, blah blah blah. That's great, but sometimes it's not that path, and that doesn't mean that they're not capable. And sometimes it's the fact that they know everything about the market that they're in, and they know how to attract talent, and they know where their blind spots are, and they are not, they're humble enough to know that they need to surround themselves with the right people. And so that's kind of what we start to focus on.
Yeah.
And our thesis, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. You go.
I was going to say our thesis was really put to the test during the lockdown, during, the pandemic. The the majority of our portfolio not only survived but thrived. These are folks that care enough about their industry. They know enough. They're passionate enough to set everything aside, 100% focus, get creative, make an opportunity out of a crisis, and just kill it. So,
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the traits and qualities that you outlined. If we are seed investors and like we are in the people picking business, like that's like an incredibly hard thing to do, because I believe that everyone thinks that they intuitively know people, right? I don't
mhm.
know of anyone who's just like, well, I'm really bad at reading people. And I
Some
don't know,
people,
like,
I've
yeah,
heard
some
that
people
before.
are. Oh yeah, no, and that's a really nice blind spot to identify. And everyone's founding team, everyone's team thinks they're incredible, right? I mean, they especially when they're pitching to you, and their existing investors will always say, well, their team's great, right? Because they're in the deal. And
Mhm.
so I totally agree with you, but it's one of those things that you kind of know it when you know it, right? You can't,
Mhm.
it's hard to describe, but there's this subtle curiosity about the person. I have a couple of different rules, like, and I'm sure this is obvious, but like the utmost moral integrity, right? If things start to come across like, your numbers start to get mixed up, and agreements that you've made verbally start to go soft, and some things and traits around that's just a huge red flag, because money's just too hard to make in this business to deal with people that have
Mhm.
shades of gray.
Mhm.
And then basically being able to work their butts off for it.
Well, it's
So tell
interesting.
me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
No, no, no. It was interesting when you were talking about like there's like the numbers start to go like maybe it's reporting, but it did kind of jog my memory. There's been a couple of times where I felt very confident about a founder, and then we've gotten into negotiating a term sheet and or negotiating through kind of all of the closing docs, and red flags start to come up there, right? Like
Hmm.
if they become very adversarial. I mean, I'd like to think that we're really reasonable investors. We're not looking to take advantage of any teams. We totally understand that it's hard to be an entrepreneur. We understand that entrepreneurs like to, maintain equity, and um, but when you start doing those negotiations, you can start to see a lot of your personality, a lot of the personality, and actually due diligence is a really good opportunity to vet a founder as well, and for the founder to vet the investor. It's not all about investors vetting founders. The due diligence process can actually be a really wonderful process where founders can learn a lot about their company, instead of looking at it as like a lot of work and that the investors are just trying to call my baby ugly. There's
Hmm.
a chance to like really forge a good relationship with your investor, and the investor to forge a really good collaborative relationship with the founder, because once you sign those documents, it can be a lot like a marriage, right? And setting the foundation during due diligence, learning about using the opportunity, the questions from the investors, the information that they want to extract from you as a way to learn more and more about your company, and for the investor to kind of learn more and more about the company as well, and not really look at it as a time to be like overly critical, just like a learning opportunity, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I find the term sheet dance back and
mhm.
forth is a pretty emotional time,
It
because
totally.
everybody like thinks they're getting fucked, right? And like everyone, in my experience, and I've been a victim of this. I've gotten super
Mhm.
angry during term sheets, and I'll admit it.
Yeah.
And um, you kind of come to the point where you're just talking at each other, like no one's really listening to kind of what we talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah, but the trust issues, to me, that's a red flag, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, you can kind of tell when there's unreasonable terms, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes the founder doesn't know what they don't know because this is the first time they do it, and you may give them a piece of advice or even ask them to like double check with their attorney, and and there's still kind of that really deep-seated mistrust. And I just feel like if that's really existing during something as preliminary as the term sheet, I don't know that that's just going to go away. Does that make sense?
Right. No, yeah. And a natural distrust, because at the end of the day, you have to be in bed with these people after you
Yes.
sign. And,
Yeah.
it's definitely a people business. And, I always say to founders, I was like, we know we have a good deal when both of us are happy or both of us are unhappy.
Right.
Like we both have to be on the
Exactly.
same page with that.
That's my point, right? So it's an opportunity
Mhm.
to really, really understand the person on
Right.
both sides of the table.
Exactly. On both sides of the table. On both sides of the
Yeah.
table. Cool. So tell me what how you're spending your days now when you're not working with MooDoos portfolio companies. And I know you're pretty involved in the angel community in San Diego, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would call it all work because it's all tied,
Hmm.
right? I mean, a
Hmm.
lot of the deal sourcing that we do for MooDoos comes through some of the angel groups and the ecosystem that we're involved in. Um, I spend a lot of my time with a local angel group called NuFund Ventures, which I'm currently the president of. And NuFund Ventures is now a collaboration of close to 400 different members or angel investors. And so we work together to source deals, invest in deals, and mentor and kind of um, offer as much help as we can to our portfolio companies that come through. We also have a local. It's actually not local anymore. I mean, we are local. We have a local focus, but a lot of our members now are virtual, and you can thank the pandemic for that. But that's been actually very, very helpful because we've been able to expand the knowledge base that we can work together with to vet deals. Some of our most active investors at NuFund are not in San Diego. One of ours is actually in Alaska. So it's just really wonderful that we've been able to expand our membership because we're only as good as our membership. And so I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit about what angel groups are or
Yeah, no, I think
jump
I
ahead
think
there.
everybody usually has a good context about it. One thing that I've known about NuFund, which is a rebrand from Tech Coast Angels,
Yes.
um, is that you invest through a fund, right? You don't
Yes.
actually have to have everybody like circle and make a decision. So I'd love to talk about just the efficiencies and inefficiencies of angel groups because I've been involved in angel groups where that's not the case, and
Mhm.
it becomes very, very, very difficult, and founders just don't want to come. So love to hear more
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, so you are correct. We recently rebranded from Tech Coast Angels San Diego. So Tech Coast Angels is a network of angel groups across Southern California. We were the San Diego chapter. We recently rebranded just because there was a lot of new initiatives that we had taken over the last couple of years and our membership had grown. And we really felt like it was time for us to kind of move on our own and continue to grow the business model the way that we have. And part of that unique business model is the fund. So a lot of angel groups, I think the criticism about angel groups is that we angels are individuals. They work together really only to source deals and maybe vet deals, and they invest individually. So as a founder, when you come to a group of angel investors, it's hard to know how much money you're going to raise because everybody is investing individually. So when you go to a fund, you know a little bit about that fund, you know what their typical check size is, you have a good idea of like their thesis. So as a founder, it's easy to say, "Hey, I don't know if I'm going to bother applying to this fund or that fund because I have a good idea of like, how that's going to fit within my raise." Um, and so we designed this annual fund to make the entrepreneur journey easier to come through our group, right? So we still vet. Well, we actually vet deals individually, but then or we source deals individually and then we vet them together in screening opportunities. And then we work together as a team to go through the diligence and negotiate. If we are negotiating term sheets and legal documents, we do that. And there are angels that in our group that invest individually, but the majority of our members, I think now close to like 85%, invest through what we call our annual fund. And so every member has a chance to invest. They can invest as many units as they want into the fund, and then that fund then invests is usually there's sidecar investments, sidecar funds where angels will make their individual investments first and then the fund. We go forward with our fund. So usually the fund is the one that's making the investment first, and then the individual investors can then invest alongside the fund. And that's kind of nice because if the fund is investing, it usually means it's a very popular and investable deal. And then if you're already invested, if you're a member who's invested in the fund, you can then double down by making an individual investment as well, which is really, really great. And so we try to raise the fund yearly. I would say we do a capital call, and it's usually depleted by 8 to 9 months. So we just depleted our ACE 22 fund, and we're about to do capital call for our next annual fund, probably beginning next week. And that has grown over time. Yeah.
I mean, that is so awesome because, you're giving optionality. I mean, all the reasons you said, but like you're giving optionality. Like you're saying, I want to do angel deals. Okay. Where's your check? Right.
Right.
Right. And then, so they commit to the angel deals. And then if they want to be active, there's opportunities to be active. Right. But nobody can kind of just hide in the cut and waste anyone's time. Right. Like if you want to commit to angel deals, commit to the angel deals. And if you want to be an influence on how to either pick the companies, diligence the companies, source the companies, then, there's plenty of opportunities to do it.
Yeah. And the other really cool thing about this fund is it became a really great way to onboard and interest more investors, because there's a lot of folks out there that are highly qualified and meet the SEC guidelines of an individual angel investor, but don't invest because it's intimidating and it's high risk, frankly. And it's hard to understand, how to make investments and then how to vet all of those things. And again, if we go back to kind of the idea of having to diversify your portfolio, because the reality is, 9 out of 10 startup companies are going to fail. You really have to create that diversity. And usually the minimum check size for any given deal is about $20,000. That is not normally something that's accessible to everybody to be able to write $20,000 checks a year, or however, maybe it's over 2 years or whatever. And even if it is, if you don't know anything about it, that's not something you're just going to start doing, right? You want to learn a little bit. So what this allows you to do, the fund allows you to do, you can buy a unit for a relatively, a much lower price than, $200,000 into, your first portfolio. And then you can be a part of the fund, a part of the group, learn from angels around you that have been investing for quite a few years. So get yourself involved with sourcing, get yourself involved with diligence. And then your smallish investment then invests with the fund into, like this year we invested in 25 companies. So you automatically get the diversification without putting a lot of risk capital in, and you get to learn. And what's great about that is we've seen new investors, they'll buy one unit in the fund, and then they will learn so much and feel comfortable. Then they'll start investing alongside the fund, and then they'll increase their investment in the fund the next year. So it's like people become more and more comfortable with it, and then they're able to deploy more capital. So it's great for the group, and it's great for, the ecosystem around us.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then, so how are the funds performing?
Actually, really, really well. It's still early. We all know that funds have a life of really like 7 to 10 years. And our first fund, I think, was I think it was 4 years ago. They start to, when you're doing them every year, you have to think like, oh, was that portfolio company in that one or what? But I guess the 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 really early data is showing us that at least the first two funds, which was ACE 18, ACE 19, and ACE 20, are performing in the top 25% of all
Nice.
managed funds so far. Like it's still early, right? These are organic. Things are changing all the time with the return for the overall return profile for the fund. But we're seeing top 5%, top 25%, and that's across the board, even professionally managed VC funds. So very
That's
exciting.
yeah, that's just super exciting, and it says a lot to diversification and your sourcing ability, right? Because these companies
Mhm.
are super early.
Well,
So
and it
I
says a lot to the about the members, right? You're only
right,
as good as your members.
right,
So
exactly. So tell me, I follow you on Instagram and LinkedIn, and there's something that's super interesting about you to me that I'd love to talk about because I relate to it a lot, and that is your openness about having attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and
yeah.
how it affects your life on a daily basis and how you live with it. And it's I think it's something that's not really talked about, you know what I mean? And people just kind of label themselves that. And I don't know. So anyway, I want to talk to you about that because you're clearly well versed on the subject.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that I'm starting to focus more on. I focus a lot on neurodivergent women, but there's a lot of men also that, and I guess I'll back up and say neurodivergent is kind of the all encapsulating word for those with ADHD, maybe autism, and some other sensitivity disorders. I don't even like to use the word disorder, right? Because everybody's mind is different, and some of these things can actually create superpowers. But not enough people talk about it, and I think women especially. So, I grew up in the early '80s, into the '90s, and I think when ADHD was first being noticed, women were overlooked because it was thought of being like little boys can't sit still kind of um, issue, right? But
Yeah.
women with AD, yeah,
Give him Ritalin.
right, right. And so I've just been doing a lot. I was diagnosed in my 20s, right? And I spent a lot of my childhood knowing that like something was different, that like I didn't work the same as everybody else, and I felt a lot of the times that I didn't fit in, but I knew I was smart and I knew I was driven, but it was very difficult to be fitting in the conventional way of teaching in the conventional school system, and I had to kind of make up for that, and kind of created what could be semi unhealthy perfectionism, where you see everybody else being able to sit down, they can study, they can take these tests, you're not thinking twice about it. And for someone like me, I would try to prove by working 10 times harder, and I'm going to make sure that I get the I'm not just getting a good grade, I'm and it doesn't look like ADHD because these women are successful and they are leaders and they've worked their way through college, but it's a lot of what we call masking, right?
Mm,
And a lot of women were not diagnosed, and they now call, as this is kind of the Gen Z, I'm sorry, not Gen Z, Gen X, and elder millennials as like the forgotten generation, right?
mm,
So I think when I was finally diagnosed, I looked back on my childhood and it was so obvious, right, that I struggled with a lot of a lot of areas of my life, and I worked really hard to mask it, and how exhausting that was. And it's so clear now, and it's hard to think back and say, hey, if I had been diagnosed like the boys were in my class or in my generation, what would my my schooling look like, my career look like now? Maybe it wouldn't have been such a struggle. And the reason why I call it out is because there's a thought process that people with ADHD or maybe high functioning autism can't succeed, right? Like
mhm.
those are the people that are can't finish projects, or there's also a thought of them being lazy or discombobulated or disorganized. and those people can't be the top of their class. They can't run a company. Well, actually, they can, because they can use certain aspects of their neurodivergence as a superpower, which is being curious in many things, finding topics and hyper focusing on them, and learning everything there is about it, and not being afraid to take risks is another part of it. And so these are superpowers. Once you understand, once you're diagnosed with it, and you can learn how to wield these in your favor. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs actually are diagnosed with ADHD. So there's a big misconception that you can't be smart and you can't succeed if you have any of this neurodivergence, but you actually can.
Yeah, I love the term superpower. I don't think I was able to identify. I never had the name for it, superpower. But when I started my firm last year, I decided that I was not going to do anything that I wasn't good at. Right. And I
Yeah.
was, and I was
Yes.
just, going to figure out how to outsource it, or, pass it off to my associate I hired for it. And I just focused completely on what drives me and what I'm good at. And it's paying off in spades. I'm like 150% of somebody normally who would have this role, because I've got the gift, right? And
Right.
problem is you don't have if you don't have the channel, like it's confusing. You know what I mean? Like
So
not being able
confusing.
to conform, not being able to conform in a way that is super is super depressing, really. I think
Yeah.
I've really mastered it at work. I don't think I've mastered it at home.
Yeah.
Like, so I definitely need, because I've got a wife and 3 kids. I definitely need,
Yep.
I don't know if it's, what do I need? Medication? I mean, I take a
Yeah.
shit ton of Wellbutrin.
Yeah.
Are there training exercises? What do I got to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for different people, right? And so, it's the same thing you're talking about. Like once you're aware of it and then you focus on the things that you're just not, you've got your genius zone, which is the stuff that you're really good at and it really excites you. And then there's a zone, here goes my ADHD. There's the zone in between, which I'm forgetting what it is, where it's like you're good at it and you don't quite like it, but you'll do it. And
Right.
then there's kind of like that bottom where it's like you're not good at it and it doesn't do anything for you, but you feel like you have to do it. And that's like when you're in school, and you're forced to do all those things that it's just not that I'm not built that way, and I shouldn't be. I should be focusing on the things that I'm really, really good at. And once you can figure what that is and what excites you, then you're able to succeed and excel. And there's other people that are really good at the things that you're not good at. You don't
Hmm.
have to be all of those things.
No.
And it's also a great way to learn how to delegate, right? So in my early career, I was such a perfectionist, and I was afraid to let go of everything because I'm like, ooh, then they're going to know that I'm not good at everything,
Yeah. They're going
right?
to
And
take
that
it.
was
Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna take it and then they're gonna find out that like I'm not good at everything and there's only certain things. And then you start to realize it's like, no, I shouldn't be working on that. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's like this is what I'm good at and this is how I'm gonna succeed and this is how I show up the best for my family, for my work, for my founders, for everybody around me when I focus in on those things that I'm really good at. And that could be I was finally prescribed Adderall in my 20s, and medication is not for everybody. For me, it really, really, really helped. Meditation is good. There's other sensory things. I'm somebody who you can see even on this call, like I'm moving my
Hmm.
hands around. I seek stimulation, and so I've now after the out of the research that I've done, I've realized there's things that I can do while I'm working that help my focus because I live in a state of under stimulation, and I'm always seeking stimulation. And so when I have to put heads down and do heads down kind of focus work, which is sometimes very difficult for me, especially if it's something that I'm not super interested in, but I got to do it. I can do things like have something to fidget with in my hand. I have a sensory swing that I can go and like sit in the sensory swing and kind of swing back and forth.
Does
And it
that
kind
does
of
that
like,
weird does that weird people out on Zoom?
I do not do that on Zoom.
You're like on
But
a
it's like
call. Yeah.
no, it's like when I have to do things like I have to actually like focus in and read something, or I have to do some really kind of intense brainstorming and strategic work, I can sit in the swing, and the swing kind of like keeps my body moving, and so that my brain can like focus in.
I
It's very
like that.
interesting how that works. But I didn't learn that until I read certain books and kind of started to really understand. So
Yeah. So, what is your favorite book?
So that's a good lead in question.
Hmm.
There's a book that was released, I want to say it was a couple years ago by a researcher. Her name is Janara Narenberg, and it's called The Divergent Mind. And it's talking exactly everything that we just talked about is what she dives into. And she's focusing specifically on women. But there are men in my life that have read that book and had a lot of kind of eye opening on new understandings of themselves, and a lot of what she talks about is kind of like focusing in on the superpowers, learning about like, understimulation and overstimulation and how that can help you focus. And I'm talking particularly about ADHD. She also addresses high functioning autism and other kind of sensory disorders. But ADHD specifically is kind of what I was focusing on in the book because that's what I'm diagnosed with. And it was just mind blowing.
Wow.
There's just so much information in there that is not really talked about, in psychology. Because right now, ADHD, autism, those things are typically explored and diagnosed through the psychology world. And what she talks about is not all of this stuff needs to be pathological, right? Some of it is just exactly what I said, what I mentioned. It's like understimulation, overstimulation, and understanding how to regulate that,
Hmm.
right?
Awesome.
It's
Super
very,
cool.
very interesting.
And then what's the best piece
So,
of business advice you've ever gotten?
business advice I've ever gotten. Well, there's a quote that's actually becoming very true recently for me that I've always kind of thought about, and it's by a gentleman of his name is Seth Godin, and he was a very successful entrepreneur back in Web 0.0. So this was like the .com era, and his quote is, "Change almost never fails because it's too early. It almost always fails because it's too late." And I love that, especially now, because I just mentioned Web 1.0. Everyone's talking a lot about Web 3.0. Like, what does that mean? Well, it means business is connected in so many different ways now, right? Like
Hmm.
we're an ecosystem. We're connected to our consumers, our stakeholders, our employees, our leadership through so many different channels. There's two-way communication, there's three-way communication, there's,
Hmm.
LinkedIn, social media, review sites, blogs, Medium, chatbots, emails, email lists, so many ways for all of us to get to kind of speak to each other, and companies need to be focused, and that causes so much change, right? Like, because you can't sit still when your stakeholders and your customers can connect with you on so many different levels, and change is so important in companies now. So it's like just constantly thinking about and staying ahead, right?
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Caitlin, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, this is the Capital Stack, where we talk to investors, operators, and founders about all things value creation. If you like this episode, please subscribe. We are on all the major platforms: Apple, Spotify, YouTube. You can search my name, David Paul, or look in the Capital Stack. Any review would be nice. You can give me a bad review. I'd love to read it. Anyway, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Bye.